boxing news. Ow! Okay, we'll start with this. Matchroom has officially announced their endeavor into the land down under, matching two of their own boys, two of their own Australian talents in Jarvis and Paro. And naturally, they're going to be showcasing...
Seems to be an effort to showcase their Australian fighters, their Australian talent.
Matchroom's Australian fighters, Matchroom's Australian talent. As stated, Jarvis is going to be taking on Paro.
Unbeaten heavyweight up-and-comer Dempsey McKean is going to be fighting on that card.
And amateur standout turned professional boxer, unbeaten up-and-comer, unbeaten featherweight, Nicholson will be participating on that card as well, set to go down in September.
Preliminary reports seem to indicate that the card is going to land somewhere in Queensland.
In September, though an official location has not been named yet.
I saw a blurb 1 or 2 days ago about Nicholson facing unbeaten up-and-comer Rebecca Hawker.
Australian national, the same way that Nicholson is an Australian national. You have to figure that if they're going as far as matching two of their own boys, two of their own Australian fighters in Jarvis and Paro, that the same might be true for the rest of the card.
Australian fighters versus Australian fighters.
Currently, there are 6 registered Australian featherweights in today's women's featherweight division. 4 of them are unbeaten fighters. 4 of them are unbeaten. Rebecca Hawker and Nicholson are 2 among them.
Carly Salmon and Amber Amelia are 2 others.
Sky Falzon is another. Amber Amelia and Danny Mace.
Well, they're not unbeaten fighters, but they are registered Australian featherweights.
And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Nicholson face one of these Australian featherweights in what is Matchroom's Australian debut.
Like I said, I heard some kind of rumor, some kind of rumbling that she'd be facing Rebecca Hawker.
It's not official, and the fight is not yet registered on BoxRec, so don't quote me on that. That's just something I heard. That's just something I heard.
So they may be doing an all-Australian show in Australia.
But what would an all-Australian show be without Matchroom's own Australian blonde bomber, Ebony Bridges?
Oddly enough, they didn't mention her.
I really don't know what that means. They went as far as incorporating Nicholson and Dempsey McKean on the card's poster.
The official poster for the card.
You think about that Ebony Bridges as a fighter is in many ways further along than Nicholson, further along even than Dempsey McKean, because she's a reigning world champion.
If she were going to be on the card, why wouldn't they put her on the poster?
You know, very recently, Australian-born, Miami-based fighter Avril Matthey, unbeaten up-and-comer Avril Matthey. She was in action. She advanced to a professional record of 8 wins, no losses, and 1 draw, and post-fight, she actually called out Ebony Bridges.
If the idea is to do an all-Australian card in Australia,
to showcase local talent, not just Matchroom's fighters, but Australian fighters overall, and you're going as far as matching 2 of your own unbeaten fighters in Jarvis and Paro. You're going as far as matching Nicholson against Beck Hawker.
Why wouldn't you add Ebony Bridges versus Avril Matthey to the card?
Ebony Bridges versus Shannon O'Connell. Shannon O'Connell, who's supposed to be in action very soon against Sarah Higginson, and what can only be interpreted as a prelude to perhaps something bigger. Shannon O'Connell is ranked at number 1 by way of the IBF. I believe she is due a title shot.
I think she's due a title shot at the Blue Belt.
Even though no such order has been announced, no such order has come down. Either Shannon O'Connell or Avril Matthey would be an ideal opponent option for Ebony Bridges for this card overall that looks to be featuring nothing but Australian fighters and local Australian talent.
Yeah, Bridges versus O'Connell would be ideal for the card, but not ideal for Ebony.
Ideal for the card, ideal for the decorum, ideal for the fight fans even, as it would be one hell of a fight, one whopper of a match, but it would be less than ideal for Ebony, who has aspirations of unifying this division, unifying the 118-pound division, and Shannon is a threat.
Dangerous fucking fight for Ebony.
There are 5 registered super bantamweights as far as Australian nationals go. Shannon O'Connell is just one among them. Ebony Bridges is another, as is Avril Matthey, who I think for Ebony would be a more ideal choice. Avril has 9 professional fights, the same as Ebony Bridges, though it's a much more winnable fight than the Shannon O'Connell fight.
Yeah, we've talked about that fight and how Ebony has a stylistic advantage.
She has a stylistic edge, and you could also give her the edge in power. She certainly has the edge in quality of opponents, quality of competition.
Yeah, she's fought better fighters than Avril Matthey has.
They have the same number of professional bouts, the same number of professional fights, though not the same level of experience under the hot lights.
I'll tell you, it'd be pretty fucking strange if Ebony Bridges don't fight on this thing.
I always got the sense that Ebony Bridges wanted to cater to a more global audience, attract that many more eyes. She never wanted to stay local, nestled into the domestic Australian boxing scene. But if Matchroom is expanding into the Australian market, which is a booming market, by the way, and we're going to talk about that.
If they are doing a show in Australia, why wouldn't she be part of it?
If September comes and goes and Ebony isn't a part of this show, I just happen to think that'd be pretty strange, pretty weird.
Even if Ebony ain't too keen on fighting Shannon O'Connell, she can fight Avril Mathy. She's Australian, Ebony's Australian.
Card seems geared towards an Australian audience, showcasing all Australian talent, all Australian fighters in Australia. It's the ideal situation.
Might be speaking too soon. Maybe Ebony's already going to be part of the card. They just haven't announced it yet.
Matchroom is making their maiden voyage into the land down under. Interesting tidbit when it comes to that endeavor is that Rick Mirrigan with the matchmaking. Rick Mirrigan, who handles the career of Jose Ramirez, he took to social media and said, Liam Paro, you turned down Jose Ramirez with him going...
He's going to Australia to fight this guy.
It's why you have to admire George Kambosos Jr., as he would have jumped at number 1 versus number 2. For those that aren't aware, those that aren't in the know, Liam Paro and Jose Ramirez are the number 1 and number 2 guys by way of the WBO's rank standings. We know that talks for a Jose Ramirez versus Conor Benn fight fizzled out. We know that Jose Ramirez and his team...
They petitioned the WBO to secure a top spot in their rankings.
And they got it. Jose Ramirez is ranked ahead of Jack Catterall, who to a lot of people was a man hard done when it comes to the decision in that Josh Taylor fight, a man that was hard done by the WBO, who so chose to rank both Liam Paro and Jose Ramirez ahead of him.
Here's how it breaks down.
According to Rick, Liam Paro bailed on Jose Ramirez to fight Jacques Jarvis in this all-Australian Matchroom card. One is left to wonder as to why that is. Why would that be? Jose Ramirez would be a high-profile fight for Liam Paro, who for the most part is flying largely under the radar, even though he's the WBO's number 1 contender. Why would he do that?
Why would he bail on Jose Ramirez for Jacques Jarvis?
Winner of the fight would be in a pole position to become the WBO's mandatory challenger.
But don't forget, the WBO's mandatory was the last mandatory that Josh Taylor satisfied.
Could be well over a year's time before the WBO orders him to satisfy another. And perhaps that's the reason that Liam didn't prioritize a Jose Ramirez fight over a Brock Jarvis fight.
He figures why fight for mandatory status when the fight likely won't get ordered anyway.
They ain't got dibs on Josh Taylor next. You know who does? Jose Zapata, by way of the WBC. And behind Jose Zapata, if Josh were to beat him, is the IBF's mandatory challenger.
That's the rotation for the mandatories. That's the rotation for the belts.
And that's likely why Liam Paro and his team chose to go in another direction, away from a Jose Ramirez fight and into a Brock Jarvis fight, a fight that I think is a more winnable fight than a Jose Ramirez fight. I mean, let's be honest, Jose Ramirez is more experienced than the both of those guys. He's a unified champion, or he was.
Is this a duck?
You could call it that. Choosing to fight a less experienced fighter over a more high-profile, dangerous fighter like a Jose Ramirez, you could call it that. You could call it a duck. And I'm sure that they have their reasons. Why play the B-side to Jose Ramirez in a very dangerous fight when you can fight in a more winnable fight as a headliner in your own backyard, in your own neck of the woods, under your own promotional banner? Because Liam Paro is a Matchroom fighter.
If you want to call it a duck, you can call it a duck.
Maybe the money they were offered for Jose Ramirez was comparable to the money they were offered for Brock Jarvis.
If you want to call it a duck, you can call it a duck.
I'm just reverse engineering how it is we got here. Why? Why exactly? Why would Liam Paro walk away from a Jose Ramirez fight for a Jacques Jarvis fight? Now, there are a few reasons I can think of. The money might have been comparable for both fights, but one fight allows you to fight under your own promotional banner in a more winnable fight than a Jose Ramirez fight, a fight that's supposed to get you a title shot, but it's a title shot, mandatory title shot, that likely won't get mandated for a year or well over a year.
Because the last mandatory Josh Taylor satisfied was by way of the WBO, Jack Catterall.
This creates a situation to where Jose Ramirez might have to go down the ranks to participate in the WBO final eliminator to see himself become the WBO's mandatory challenger, and right behind him is none other than Jack Catterall.
Lucky twist of fate for Jack the Cat.
Jack Catterall, who I told you A lot of people felt he was a man hard done by the judges in Scotland in that Josh Taylor fight, a man hard done by way of the WBO.
Of course, they chose to rank Liam Paro and Jose Ramirez ahead of him.
Even though to a lot of people, Jack Catterall deserved the nod. Jack Catterall did enough to win a decision. He did on my card at least by a point. I had Jack winning that Josh Taylor fight.
Well, at least now he's one step closer to getting a rematch.
Let's see if Jose Ramirez don't try to make a fight with him as easily as he just tried to make a fight with Liam Paro, who's going to be busy in September in this all-Australian showdown with Jock Jarvis. On that undercard, we're going to see unbeaten heavyweight up-and-comer Dempsey McKean.
Who are they going to match him against?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. When it comes to those Australian nationals and talent pool they have in the heavyweight division, there really is a lot to choose from, though some faces are a lot more familiar than others. One name that almost immediately comes to mind.
Justice Hooney. He just racked up his 6th professional victory against Joseph Goodall.
And it just so happens that both Justice Hooney and Dempsey McKean, those are the number 1 and number 2 guys in the Australian heavyweight rank standings in all of Australia.
Justice Hooney's number 1 and Dempsey McKean is number 2.
Amateur standout Justice Hooney, who is a very capable fighter, even though he only has 6 professional contests, 6 professional bouts. Amateur standout turned professional boxer Justice Hooney, who's got serious combinations.
Serious hand speed and great punch placement.
He has less than half the fights that Dempsey McKean has, but this is a guy with a really high ceiling. It would be a very risky fight for Dempsey McKean, if I'm being honest. Another name that almost immediately comes to mind is Joseph Goodall, who just suffered his first professional loss to Justice Hooney. I don't see why they can't conjure up that guy. Durable guy, makes for a great fight. Another name that almost immediately comes to mind, and a more familiar face in many ways, is Lucas Brown. Lucas Brown, who just upset the apple cart for New Zealand's Junior Fa. In a fight that most of us picked him to get splattered in, he's the one that did the splattering in the first round on the undercard of Kambosos versus Haney. Dempsey McKean versus Lucas Brown on the undercard.
On the undercard of Jock Jarvis versus Liam Paro makes a lot of sense.
There's a lot to choose from. You can go with any one of the aforementioned fighters, Justice Hooney, Joseph Goodall, Lucas Brown. You could go with Sonny Bill Williams. You could go with local favorite Paul Gallen, rugby player turned pugilist.
Matchroom's been making waves and ruffling feathers in America.
Now they want to ruffle some feathers in Australia and disrupt the market for all those local promoters with this endeavor.
Let's see how this September card stacks up once it's finalized.
Finally, in men's heavyweight news, Tyson Fury, who very recently chimed in on a lot of different subjects, Joshua versus Usyk 2, Dillian White versus Daniel Dubois, he talked about Deontay Wilder's potential return, and he said he's been absolutely destroyed mentally, physically, and emotionally. He's a wreck at the moment. I'd like to see him retire. However, if he does want another good hiding, give me a call.
I feel like Tyson Fury toggles between giving Deontay Wilder praise and belittling him.
He seems to alternate between praising Deontay and belittling Deontay.
Can't make up his mind how he feels?
I'll tell you what it is. When he hears that Deontay Wilder's coming back, you know, Deontay Wilder's one of the best wins on Tyson Fury's entire resume.
Some people are more high on him for beating Deontay than they're high on him for beating Vladimir.
Even though Vladimir was a better fighter, a more decorated champion, unified in his time, he reigned for 9 years as heavyweight champion, whereas Deontay only reigned for 5 against low-level competition.
Didn't unify shit.
Tyson Fury toggles from belittling Deontay Wilder to lavishing praise upon him whenever it's convenient. When he hears that Deontay Wilder is mounting a comeback,
he'll tell you that he's mentally destroyed so that no one else can get credit for beating him moving forward.
But if the news is that Deontay Wilder is staying retired, you'll notice that Tyson Fury seems to sing a very different tune.
When he's staying retired, Deontay Wilder's the second best heavyweight in the world.
It's not even that there isn't some truth to what Tyson Fury is saying. I honestly believe there is some truth to what he's saying. I do think that he's mentally, psychologically, physically, and spiritually compromised. I think the 2 losses that he suffered at the hands of Tyson Fury left him a broken man, unsure of himself. I do agree with that bit of it, but you'll notice that Tyson Fury's tune, it does change.
It changes from time to time, and that's why I think it changes.
Changes whenever it's convenient for him to indirectly glorify himself. He'll make it seem like he's glorifying Wilder when really he's just glorifying himself for having beaten him. And, you know, if he sees that Wilder's coming back, well, he doesn't want anybody else getting credit for beating Wilder, so he'll resort to belittling him and berating him, saying that he's a broken man.
Look at what he just said about Dillian White.
He said, I made him look like he couldn't fight, but do not underestimate White. Someone could get knocked out quite quickly, whoever lands. That's an exciting fight. I definitely encourage Dillian and Daniel to take it.
Don't you see that when he's talking about himself, suddenly Dillian's a good fighter?
As a means to praise himself for having beaten him. He never gave Anthony Joshua credit for knocking that guy out. Anthony Joshua knocked him out years ago. He called him a binman.
I'm not sure if he called him a binman, but I know he called him a lot of other things. He called him a lot of other names.
The point is that beating Dillian White doesn't matter until Tyson Fury does it in Tyson Fury's own mind.
And I think that applies to Wilder, too.
That's the way it looks, though. In truth, there is some truth to what Tyson Fury said about Deontay Wilder. At least I think it is. I do think he's a broken man. You know, there was all this hubbub about him potentially coming back at the erection of his statue in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but there are conflicting reports. You hear that he's not retiring, that he's going to continue. That's what he said. But at the same time, he said he doesn't have the same itch that he used to have.
The most new news we've heard when it comes to Wilder is that he cut a record with his brother.
We haven't heard anything about a tentative opponent being lined up, a tentative fight date, an ETA on his ring return. He hasn't officially announced his retirement, but he hasn't officially announced a comeback fight either.
And let's be honest, who really expects to see this guy fight for a world title?
Tyson Fury still has the WBC title, and he let it be known that he's not going to vacate it anytime soon. He's going to hang on to it for as long as he can. The other 3 alphabet titles, they're all tied up between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk. So the idea that Wilder might fight for an alphabet title upon his return...
It's not likely. What's his comeback going to look like?
I don't think he's all of a sudden going to start doing business with Matchroom. I don't think he's going to continue to do business with Top Rank. Look where that got him.
Got the shit beat out of him 2 times and they took his belt.
There's still money out there for Deontay Wilder. And there are still some fights on his side of the street. And even though I think Tyson Fury is just indirectly glorifying himself for having beaten Deontay Wilder, there is something to what he's saying. I think he's broken.
I think Wilder's damaged.